Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. This is BBC News live from Washington. The Israeli cabinet has voted to approve the Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal after a meeting that lasted more than 6 hours. TikTok says the social media app will go dark on Sunday unless the US gives definitive assurances that it won't enforce a looming ban. And within the streets of Pompeii, a once-in-a-century find, buried in the ancient Italian city. Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to BBC News. The Israeli cabinet has voted to approve a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza. It's the first phase of a deal which, if implemented in full, will end the 15-month war in Gaza. The meeting lasted over 6 hours, with some ministers having threatened to resign. They were arguing the agreement rewards Hamas. The first hostages are now due to be released as early as Sunday. In return, Israel says it will release dozens of Palestinian prisoners. They include some detainees as young as 16. Hamas will return 33 Israeli hostages over this initial 6-week period. Also, these pictures are from Egypt, where trucks are waiting to bring aid into Gaza. Under this deal, Israel will allow 600 trucks into Gaza every day. That's 12 times more than at the moment. In another development, the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, says it's prepared to assume full responsibility of Gaza. At the moment, the Palestinian Authority partly controls the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Well, protests both for and, as shown here, against the Gaza ceasefire deal have been taking place across Israel. Since the draft deal was first announced on Wednesday, officials in Gaza say more than 100 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, half of them women and children. Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, has this report from Jerusalem.
This is the boy who lived. Assad Khalifa, 3 years old. He's being looked after by neighbors in Gaza City. And that's his cry for help, from the rubble the night before last. He was strong enough to wave. The men had been about to abandon their search. And he was strong enough to try to clear concrete dust from his mouth. The Israelis killed Assad's parents, his baby sister, aunt and uncle when they destroyed the building a few hours after the ceasefire was announced. The background buzz is from an Israeli drone. Miraculously, Assad only had cuts and bruises. He's been taken in by his mother's best friend.
This little boy lost his mother and father because a pilot flying a plane in the sky took a decision and took away all the care he had.
Their neighborhood, Rimal, used to be the richest part of Gaza City. 50 miles away in Jerusalem, the Israeli cabinet ratified the ceasefire agreement. Ultranationalists voted against. They want Prime Minister Netanyahu to resume the war. The faces of the 1,200 killed in the October attacks are everywhere in Israel. This was outside the Prime Minister's office, also a reminder that Israelis are deeply divided over the best way to get the hostages back. Netanyahu's critics say he's broken his promise to rescue the hostages by destroying Hamas completely. Instead, he's made a deal with Hamas.
Our message is very clear, that a ceasefire deal is a surrender to Hamas. We will only support a deal if all hostages are released. That would send a message to the enemy that we are the rulers.
Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition crisis is going to be of little importance to Donald Trump, who's always going to put the interests of his own presidency first. And he wants to re-enter the White House, being able to claim, with some justification, that he was able to deliver a ceasefire that Joe Biden could not. Now, longer term, the structure of the ceasefire could be a problem because it's over a period of weeks and months and it's in phases. And that gives plenty of time for events to happen that could be exploited by those who want the ceasefire to fail. Outside the Prime Minister's official residence, supporters of the hostages suspect Netanyahu could be one of them. They say he prolonged the agony of hostages and all Israelis by delaying a ceasefire for months.
We lost too many people in fighting. We lost too many hostages from Israeli bombs. We lost too many people from killing by the Hamas. The situation in Israel, the society become very, very bad.
Explain to me why the delay happened.
Shall I tell you the truth what I think? I think that somebody in the government didn't want that all the situation will finish because of his personally position in his life.
And who was that person?
Bibi.
Netanyahu, the Prime Minister.
Yes.
On the posters, their lives before and after the 7th of October. Happy moments in the past and the gaps left by the missing and the dead. For the families, the wait is an agony. For Israelis and Palestinians, the clock is ticking towards the ceasefire far too slowly. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly promised to destroy Hamas. So, after 15 months of conflict, what state is the group in? Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has this assessment.
When Hamas launched its brutal attack on Israel on October the 7th, it was a powerful force. It sent about 3,000 fighters across the border and launched about 5,000 rockets. In all, the armed group and political movement was estimated to have about 30,000 fighters hidden in hundreds of tunnels across Gaza. But after 15 months of war, Israel says it is a shadow of its former self.
Hamas has been decimated, their leadership has been eliminated, their rockets arsenal have been destroyed, their tunnel network has been compromised, their operational capabilities have been shattered. They are no longer the force they once were.
Certainly, many senior figures have been killed. Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Tehran in July. Its main commander in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, was killed in October. The numbers are hard to verify, but Israel claimed in September to have killed 17,000 Hamas fighters. For all that, the Americans believe the group could still come back.
Each time Israel completes its military operations and pulls back, Hamas militants regroup and reemerge because there's nothing else to fill the void. Indeed, we assess that Hamas has recruited almost as many new militants as it has lost.
Those new recruits may have fewer tunnels to hide in, they may get fewer weapons from a weakened Iran, and they may be younger and more inexperienced than the trained fighters they're replacing. But they can still fight.
They still have small groups in some different areas who could fight Israel for a very long time because they work like a militia now, not like before 7th of October as a semi-army in Gaza.
So Hamas is weakened, its ability to mount sustained military operations much reduced. But it hasn't been destroyed, something Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu once promised would happen. James Landale, BBC News.
Now, for the first time in 40 years, the presidential inauguration here in Washington will take place indoors. Donald Trump says the cold weather predicted for Monday would be dangerous for the crowd and he didn't want to see people injured. So the ceremony will now be held inside the Rotunda, the large circular room in the centre of the US Capitol. The change means significantly fewer people will be able to attend the inauguration, but thousands will be able to watch the ceremony at a nearby arena. Well, despite the cold, these Trump supporters were hoping to watch the inauguration outside.
Doesn't matter how cold it is. I came here to support this inauguration, and I came to support my God.
We could have just watched the live stream at home. And we came all the way here, and reality's like, nope, you're still watching it.
Yeah, I've always wanted to be at an inauguration, so.
So if we're allowed to still come, we're going to be there.
We support our president. We're going to be sitting there in the freezing cold, watching it on the screen when they're indoors. I think maybe we'll skip that.
Now, one of Trump's campaign promises is that on day one, he'll aggressively crack down on immigration along the US-Mexico border. Our news correspondent, Helena Humphrey, is in Yuma in Arizona, and she's been speaking to residents near the border and sent this report.
Welcome to Lutz Casino. This is a bar, restaurant and pool house here in Arizona, a swing state, of course, which we know went for Donald Trump in the election. But here in Yuma County, where we are right now, overwhelmingly voters chose Donald Trump in this election. When you speak to people here about how they're feeling about inauguration, usually the word is excitement, or people saying that they hope, for example, that it's better than the past 4 years. Just a few people being a little bit more apprehensive. But this is a really interesting area because it is a Latino majority county here in Yuma County. But nevertheless, Donald Trump did make significant inroads with that voting population. And when you talk about immigration here, you'll find people saying that perhaps they are a little bit more concerned when they hear things about a mass deportation from day one, because they say that, yes, at certain points during the Biden presidency, they did feel that the number of people coming over the border, they say, was too high. But they say, nevertheless, many people coming over here legally, 30,000 people coming over from Mexico here every day to be part of that skilled labor force, particularly in an agricultural community like this, they say is invaluable for the local economy. And those economic concerns that we heard voiced in the election really coming to the forefront when we spoke to voters here once again. Here's what they told me.
I'm feeling very hopeful. I'm hopeful that things will pick up and that the economy will get better and that the country will come together as one instead of this too divided. I don't like it as divided as it is.
Really, the economy. It's just down in the dumps right now, you know, and it's going to take a lot to get us out of it. But, you know, like I said, if we can just come together as a people, then we can do anything.
So those economic concerns coming through very strongly here. And when it came to immigration, and we spoke to officials here, they were telling us that in 2023 they were processing some 11,000 migrants coming through Yuma per month. Now they say, after executive actions by President Biden, it's 500 per month. And they've also expressed concerns that when they hear things such as mass deportations, they just don't know whether they have, they say, enough of the border force officials working here to actually be able to enact those plans.
And a quick reminder, we'll have full coverage of Donald Trump's inauguration here on BBC News with a special programme from Washington starting on Monday at 12 GMT. That's 7 a.m. US Eastern. Now, a big story here in the US. TikTok says the American service it runs will stop on Sunday if the government doesn't intervene. This comes after the US Supreme Court backed a law banning TikTok, and this could impact a lot of people. There are over 170 million TikTok users in the US. Now, this legislation was passed in response to fears about Chinese control of the app through its parent company ByteDance, and ByteDance was given an ultimatum: sell TikTok's US business or face a ban. Well, in response to this, TikTok appealed under the First Amendment right to free speech, but the Supreme Court has now knocked this back unanimously. And so the ban is set to come into force on Sunday, and that, of course, is the day before Donald Trump becomes president. Our correspondent, Nomi Iqbal, has more on the Trump administration and how it may approach this.
What can Donald Trump do to try and save TikTok? So what he can't do, first of all, is repeal the law set by Congress. I mean, this law is about as bipartisan as you can get in contemporary Washington. There are Trump loyalists in the Republican Party who want TikTok to be banned, and then there are members of the Democratic Party who agree with Donald Trump in saving TikTok. So it's not straightforward. It doesn't fall on party lines. An option that Donald Trump also has is to not enforce the law. He could say to his incoming Attorney General, Pam Bondi, don't penalise the companies like Apple and Oracle and Google who might still have TikTok on their platform. The problem with that is it's fairly questionable whether or not you can make a law effectively redundant that way. Also, given that Donald Trump is pretty mercurial, will the CEOs of these platforms want to take the risk and just take Donald Trump's word for it? The real option that Mr. Trump has is to get TikTok to sell the app to a US company. I mean, there are plenty of US companies that have expressed interest. TikTok has said that it won't do that. But if Trump can make that happen, then that is one option. And if he sees that there is a progress of a deal happening, he also has the ability to extend the deadline of the ban for 90 days.
Well, Sarah Baus is a content creator and a TikTok strategist. She has over 800,000 followers on the app. She's hoping this ban will not go ahead.
I'm absolutely hoping that we pull really anything out. Again, I keep thinking of the small businesses, 7 million American small businesses, and so many of them, including people that are close to me, 99% of their sales come from TikTok. 7 million businesses alone, that would be just washed out. So I'm hoping that we can get any positive news.
But would you consider moving to another app that might offer somewhere else that you can base your business?
I have been on other apps. I think many TikTok creators are on other apps, and we just haven't been able to replicate what we have been able to do on TikTok. But I know for me and my audience, I will find them wherever they are. I hope they'll come to find me. So I will show up wherever they need me to be.
Well, Donald Trump says he's still considering what to do about this proposed ban. Let's find out what his options are. James Grimmelman is Professor of Digital and Information Law at Cornell Law School. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Does the new president, as of Monday, have the power to simply reverse this on his own?
He can't repeal the law on his own. He can get a temporary delay if he certifies that TikTok is on its way to negotiating a sale. That wouldn't be true, but it wouldn't be the first time Donald Trump has taken an action while blatantly lying about it.
Well, that's a broader point, which, of course, he would no doubt refute. But sticking to this particular case, how much time could he buy then in order to create some space to pursue a possible sale?
He can get them a matter of months. There's a 90-day extension built into the statute. Beyond that, the law would kick in.
And so within that 90 days, perhaps TikTok could sell its US business. Is there also an option where Trump could take this back to Congress?
It's quite possible that he can convince Congress to pass some kind of new legislation that corresponds to some as yet hypothetical deal that saves face for the United States while allowing TikTok to continue to operate.
But is the fact that when this ban was initially supported by Congress, it had bipartisan support, does that further complicate Donald Trump's ability to unpick it?
It complicates it, but I think the Republicans who comprise a majority in Congress would go along with him if he told it was a priority that he absolutely insisted on. So far, he's been getting his way on party line basis. So if he told them, you have to vote for this, I suspect most of them would fall into line.
And all of these options for Donald Trump that you describe all begin once he becomes president on Monday. But of course, this ban is due to come in on Sunday. So given the Supreme Court has knocked back the appeal, does that mean it automatically has to begin on Sunday because there's no way of changing course?
Unless Biden is willing to take the action to add the extension, it will come into force on Sunday, and the app stores will block TikTok, and it will go dark as it's promised. It's quite possible we'll have a day of darkness, and then it will come back on the 20th once Trump comes into office.
There are, I know, alternatives to TikTok, nowhere near as popular, but other Chinese apps that are offering relatively similar services. How unusual is it for legislation like this to target one particular business rather than a type of business?
It's very unusual in the United States. Other countries have done more targeted actions, but we haven't done much of this here. This is technically a broader ban aimed at any app controlled by the Chinese government, but it did single out TikTok by name.
And finally, Professor Grimmelman, lots of people are trying to second guess what they think is the most likely outcome here. What's your reading of it? Where do you think we might be in, say, a month's time?
I think TikTok will continue to be operating under some kind of deal that lets everybody claim some kind of victory.
OK, thank you very much indeed for your help. That's Professor James Grimmelman from Cornell Law School. Now, 3 lawyers who defended the late Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny have been sentenced to up to 5.5 years in prison. Navalny was Vladimir Putin's highest profile critic within Russian politics, and he died suddenly in an Arctic prison last February. BBC's Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has more.
Walk into a courtroom and you wouldn't expect to see this. In the dock, 3 defence lawyers, Alexei Liptsa, Vadim Kobzev and Igor Sergunin. They had defended the late opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. Now they were on trial on extremism charges. Guilty, said the judge. The punishment, prison terms of up to 5.5 years for passing on messages from Mr. Navalny when he was in jail. Applause from their supporters, who dismissed this trial as politically motivated. The lawyers reply, "Thank you for being here." From their defence team, Andrei Orlov tells me it's an unprecedented outcome that will have consequences for legal defence in Russia. It's nearly 1 year since Alexei Navalny died in a remote penal colony. He was the Kremlin's fiercest critic. His family, his comrades say he was murdered. The Russian authorities deny any involvement in his death, but continue to pressure his associates. Towards the end of this trial, one of the lawyers convicted today, Vadim Kobzev, addressed the judge and summed up in one sentence what has been happening here. "We are on trial," he said, "for passing on the thoughts of Alexei Navalny." But it's not just Mr. Navalny's lawyers who are being put in the dock. These journalists are on trial too. They've been accused of working with Mr. Navalny's outlawed anti-corruption foundation. And yet, in the town of Petushki, where the lawyers were in court, the only trials people seem interested in are their own trials and tribulations. I'm more concerned that they've dug up the road and there's no running water, she says, and that they still haven't cleared all the snow. The fact that just down the road, 3 lawyers have been convicted and sent to prison barely registers. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, in the town of Petushki.
Now, to an astonishing discovery in Pompeii, because latest excavations there have revealed new treasures. Archaeologists have discovered a beautifully preserved private bathhouse, complete with exquisite artwork and a huge plunge pool. Pompeii was a Roman city that was destroyed when Mount Vesuvius erupted nearly 2,000 years ago, and large parts of it still remain hidden beneath the volcanic rock and ash that rained down. Our science editor, Rebecca Morell, has been given exclusive access to the site.
It's been hidden for 2,000 years. Now, a once-in-a-century discovery emerges. The grandest of spaces, with a perfectly preserved plunge pool. It's the centrepiece of a sumptuous bath complex in a private residence.
For a private house, it's actually enormous. It's, I think, the biggest found here in Pompeii in a private home. Think in the hot summers, your feet in the water, maybe a cup of wine. It's these spaces that really are part of the Pompeii effect. You go there and you can really imagine being there 5 minutes ago or 2,000 years ago.
The bathhouse is part of a grand residence. As well as the frigidarium or cold room, there's a changing room, a warm room and a hot room. And powering all of this was a boiler room. The water came in from the street, moving along a pipe into the house. I mean, look at the plumbing. It looks so modern, like you could still turn this valve on and off. The pipe would have fed into a lead boiler, and then underneath this was a furnace. You can still see the soot. Now, keeping all of this going were slaves working in unbearable conditions who would have had to have made sure that the guests next door were happy by looking through this tiny window up here. In another room, a woman's skeleton was found and a man was discovered close to a doorway.
I think they thought they were safe in this room and they'd barricaded themselves in. They'd closed the window, the doors. So the pyroclastic flow had come from Vesuvius along the street just outside this room and had caused this wall to collapse, and that had basically crushed him to death. So in fact, she was still alive while he was dying. And then this room filled with the rest of the pyroclastic flow, and that's how she died.
The woman was found with valuable items, suggesting she was high up in society.
Ah, and you've got the items here.
These are now kept in Pompeii's vault.
Wow.
Gold coins still gleaming, and gold and natural pearl earrings, and intricately etched gemstones, one showing the god Mercury.
When we found this kind of object, the distance from ancient times and modern times disappears. And we can touch a small piece of the life of these people.
The excavation here is now coming to an end, but traces of these lost Roman lives continue to emerge. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News, Pompeii.
What an extraordinary story. If you'd like to read more on that, you can find that now on the BBC website, bbc.com/news. I was looking at this article earlier. Plenty more coverage of that extraordinary coverage. Also, while you're on the website, you'll of course find lots of coverage of US politics as we look ahead to Donald Trump becoming president once more on his inauguration on Monday. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I'll see you in half an hour. Bye-bye.